So hi, I'm Forrest Shull. I'm one of the guest editors for this special issue on the future of software engineering, and I'm here with two of my guest editor colleagues. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Anita Carlton.
And Rafael Prikladniki.
And we just wanted to take an opportunity, now that we're at the end of the special issue, to kind of reflect on what happened and share some of the exciting things with everybody, I guess. I think for us as guest editors, probably the thing that was at the top of our list was just what an amazing response we got from the community on this. So we had many different pieces of the special issue, but of course one of the major ones was the peer-reviewed papers. And so we really put the call for papers out there. We wanted to see what kind of inspirational and visionary ideas the field as a whole had. And we were fairly blown away with the response. So I think looking at the data that I had, at least, we've gotten more submissions for the peer review part of the special issue than IEEE software has gotten for any of the previous special issues, at least over the last 4 years or so. So it was a wonderful amount of workload for us, but it was a wonderful sense of just how much the community was interested in being very forward-looking and very responsive, and clearly this idea of what kind of a future are we building together was something that resonated with a lot of authors. So we could talk a little bit more about some of the things we saw in the peer review, but maybe I was going to say, Anita, if you wanted to talk
Sure.
through some of the other components.
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that was very exciting is that the theme of the future of software engineering seemed to resonate so broadly. In other words, I think for ICSE, that was the theme this past year. Grady Booch did various talks around the world, and his talk was focused on the future of software engineering. So for some reason it's on a lot of people's minds. It's an incredibly relevant topic, I think, and it was just very fun. And I think, did you talk about the global nature
you
of
should
that?
say that.
I mean, I think
Absolutely.
I just wanted to build on what Forrest said, and when you look at the submissions that we received for the peer-reviewed journal, for the peer-reviewed part of this special issue, also for some of the other special areas, we did thought leader interviews, we did CTO roundtables in China and other perspectives in Brazil. I mean, we really truly have a global perspective in this issue. So I think that was really, really fun and exciting to see. One of the sections of this, and I mean, I just wanted to very briefly mention it, is we did 4 thought leader interviews on where the industry's headed. I mean, the way we positioned is to say that when you consider that software is really the building material of almost everything today, what we wanted to get a sense of is from a few thought leaders in the U.S., where do you think things are headed? What are some of the very pervasive problems? What are the things that we've got to think about and look at? And, what's going to be different as we look forward? And so we talked with a few people, and clearly we could have talked with a lot more people too. But we talked with Dr. Andrew Moore. He is the Dean of the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. Also, he was a former VP at Google. We talked with Tim O'Reilly. And Tim represents, I guess he takes on many platforms, but one is government as a platform, and he talked about Code for America. And then we talked to Dr. Paul Nielsen. He's the CEO of the Software Engineering Institute, and Dr. Kevin Fall, who's the CTO at the Software Engineering Institute. But I think all of these ideas were very inspiring. I mean, I can go through some of these, or maybe really entice people to kind of get to the issue to see what these 4 people had to say. But I mean, for Andy Moore, he was looking at sort of these large internet companies, and he said that it was clear that many of the new capabilities that we'll be seeing in software systems in 10 or 20 years have to do with the ability to adapt to information that's streaming in all of the time. So he says that these kinds of systems provide all kinds of challenges for software engineers. There's issues of testing, quality assurance on these systems that have to adapt all the time and will be running very differently over time on the basis of what kind of data is accumulated. So, I mean, he talked about all of those kinds of issues, and he talked about how to attract more people to software engineering, that there were very pervasive and persistent problems that had to be addressed. And so this was an incredibly inspiring field, and wanted to really put out a call for people to come and work on some of these really tough problems. So I think his talk, I mean, all of them were very, very inspiring. But I thought I'd give Raphael a chance to chime in.
Yeah, so I just want to share that was a very, very good experiences as well. I was just looking at the number of all the submissions we got, and we had something like 15 countries represented in all the submissions. So this is very significant in terms of worldwide coverage of and how we attract people to this issue. One of the things that we also did was the perspective department, both with China and Brazil, and we tried to have the view of CTOs and executives from companies, both in China and Brazil, and how they see the future of software engineering. So for Brazil, for example, we interviewed 3 executives from a company, a US-based company called ThoughtWorks. And ThoughtWorks has an office in Brazil, and they started in 2009, and after 6 years, they started with 5 people and now have 250 people in Brazil, so it's a very fast-growing operation. And things that they share with us in their perspective is that they think for the future of software engineering is very important for us to look at the human side of transparency, emergency, and the sustainable development for software engineering. So this is something that the readers could, of course, read in more details in the whole issue. And one last thing, one last comment is that was very interesting to see many discussions from the perspective of education. And what we did for this issue was to have a discussion on a different approach for software engineering education in the Voice of Evidence column. So 3 authors from the US, they share their view of what they call an athletic approach for software engineering education, which we thought was very interesting. So I'll now let Forrest talk about more about the papers that we have in the issue.
Sure. Well, I guess before I even launch into that, one of the things that occurred to me while you were speaking was not only how many papers we got, but of course the implication then was that we had a lot of reviewers involved. And just, the number of reviewers that gave of their time and effort and contributed to this, I mean, it really was quite a community effort. Especially since one of the things that might not be clear to all the readers is that we asked the reviewers to do a job that's a little bit outside the normal. So these aren't typical technical papers, in the sense that there's a record of what the person did, and you can look at the rigor behind it and whether or not it's worth publication. But of course, we were asking people to extrapolate forwards. There had to be some kind of a defensible tie to what's going on today, and then the authors really had to speculate about where things are going in the future in order to put together a defensible vision of that. And I thought in almost every case, the reviewers really rose to that challenge. So we got very many thoughtful reviews, but people that were, I guess, looking outside their normal comfort zone of what it means to be a reviewer, and doing a very good job of not only pulling in the defensibility and the rigor of what the authors wrote, but also whether the vision of the future was plausible and reflected a creative spirit that was helpful to the field. So having said that, the other thing I wanted to mention, as Raphael said, I think we had 15 countries there. Every country, every continent, except for Africa, was represented in the submissions we got. And there was just so much good content, so we had to be selective. We would have, I think, liked to have taken more papers and had them represented there. As it was, we took as many as we could, and we, as Raphael said, we had something go into the Voice of Evidence. We had another piece that was really more of a thought piece go into the sounding board department. So I hope in the end what we gave was a very representative sample of some of the very creative ideas we had going forward. But for the most part, I was impressed with the papers themselves, because all of them, like I mentioned, had some kind of a defensible tie to a current trend. Some of some of the papers did a really nice view of putting together what's going on with, what do we see with crowdsourcing today. And that was a paper that I found particularly insightful, because I understand better having read it, just how much crowdsourcing has permeated what we're doing today in terms of software development. You know, sometimes as you sit there in the middle of everything and see these trends happening, you don't reflect at how pervasive or how much of an impact things are having. We had papers, I think it's not surprising that papers looked at machine learning as a technology that's going forward, but what impressed me was the papers would then apply that in creative ways. You know, so I think the paper that we ended up accepting looked at what machine learning can do with the information in app stores, you know, and the user reviews that come in, and then extrapolating from that how software might you know, heal itself or adapt itself to what the users are looking for. And I think the final thing that I'll make as a point was just there were other papers that took a look at fairly well understood areas, we thought, but then put a creative spin on it. So as we pointed out in the guest editor introduction, it was somewhat surprising to us the amount of effort, well, the number of papers that looked at requirements as one of the areas where there really will be an impact in the future. And you kind of go into it looking at the requirements as a fairly well understood field, but then, of course, what it represents is that point of view of how the software and the human comes together. And will the software really be able to satisfy what the user's needs for it are and work with the user in a useful way to get something important done? So I think having read the papers, it's not surprising, actually, that would be an area where great improvements could be made.
Excellent. Thank you very much.